I just watched episode 7, The Radio. I have lots of thoughts, so let's get right into it. As usual, if you've watched farther than episode 7, just don't spoil anything in the comments. This show bounces around so much, and I think the best way to talk about it is going to be to discuss the characters one at a time instead of the scenes. So let's start with the Ghoul. This episode opens on two men with metal detectors over this atmospheric cover of the Fallout 4 theme, and it's beautiful. They come back to the shack, which absolutely looks like something I would have built in Fallout 4, so I'm happy right away. When they get inside, they find the Ghoul, and it's clear from the way that he's eating this meat and the way they're calling for Sandra, they think he might be eating Sandra. And he kind of leans into that. He's like, oh, you thought? I think in this show, ghouls do just eat the flesh of people. I'm still really not clear on the Ghoul lore here. I'm excited to finish the show so I can finally Google other people's thoughts on that without getting spoilers. But we find the Ghoul in this shack and he's looking for Moldaver. And he says something like, there's always some new faction with their dumbass ideas on how to save the world. And that's not the first time we've heard a character in the show voice that kind of exact sentiment. Everybody's trying to save the world, but nobody can agree on how. I really like that the son and father duo are lead farmers. It's a really nice piece of world building that again makes me aware that we've been gone for the past 200 years. There must be a ton of scavenge, of salvage, of metals that they can collect and resell. And the idea that your whole job is just using a metal detector to farm those pieces is a really fascinating one. It's also kind of a boring, honest job. So I can see why Tommy and his older brother got sick of it and we were looking for something more. Tommy's point is actually so understandable that he was tempted by the chance to actually build something. I get the sense that Tommy really believes that Moldaver is building something that's worth following. But of course, the Ghoul does not agree. He reveals that he killed the older brother and he's on the hunt for Moldaver. He asks Tommy if Tommy's gonna let him walk away from this, knowing that revenge is probably on his mind. And my first thought is Kellogg in Fallout 4.
I knew it was a mistake leaving him alive. I understood that kind of revenge.
Kellogg knew that by leaving the sole survivor alive, somebody was gonna come after him, inevitably. You can't leave somebody who has a motivation to take revenge on you. And that's all I could think of with the Tommy character. Because he does immediately reach for a weapon, and the Ghoul isn't messing around. He just takes him out. He knows that he has to continue doing what he's doing. We flash back to the past where the Ghoul meets Moldaver for the first time, which is where we ended the last episode. Moldaver here is called Miss Williams, and she's leading this group in a conversation about the myth of the American dream and who the enemy is. And Coop, now I'm calling him Coop, not the Ghoul, but Coop stands up and he kind of walks out. He's like, I can't take any more of this. This is bull. She calls him out for really all the things we talked about in the last episode review, which is how can you monetize the end of the world? How can you feel good about this? And he says, I'm not ashamed to make a living. They speak outside the meeting and she says something about her research and how Vault-Tec acquired her labs and cold fusion. And I know that there's something important I'm supposed to take away from this to understand Moldaver's role in the future. And to be so honest, I have no idea what it is. I don't know what she's implying. I don't know how her research plays into any of this. I honestly thought that cold fusion might mean cryopod stuff. And so I Googled it. It doesn't. So I was more confused. She gives him a little listening device. He doesn't really trust her, but he takes it anyway. In a later scene, we see him pair that listening device with his wife Barb's Pip-Boy so he can listen to conversations that she's in. But then she talks to their daughter and he kind of regrets it. He feels like he's invading the privacy of somebody he's supposed to trust. That lasts all of, 8 hours until later that night he goes out and digs it out of the trash because he doesn't trust her. He doesn't trust Vault-Tec and he wants to know what she's talking about with them. I've been trying to figure out how to connect the dots of Coop as this very rich and famous actor and the character of Coop that we see in the very beginning of episode 1, who's been reduced to doing children's parties. My guess was that he was kind of desperate for money because the ads with Vault-Tec didn't go well. He is being ostracized from his acting jobs. He lost a movie over this. But I think what actually happened is that he and Barb maybe get a divorce. I think there was some comment about alimony in the first episode. So maybe whatever he's doing here is going to lead to them splitting. And that's why he's trying to do the parties. I don't know if that makes sense that he would end up with sole custody of their daughter. There's only one episode left in this season, and I don't know how many answers we're going to get from it. Coop in the present day has come across CX-404, the dog that was traveling with Thaddeus. And there's this lovely parallel between his dog Roosevelt pre-war and this dog CX-404. And he calls her dog meat. And I just love that. I knew that they had to work that in somehow because there's been a dog meat in like every game. And I really loved that it was Coop just kind of sitting with her and thinking about his old dog. Like, that was a lovely way to work the dog meat name into this show. Those are all the scenes with the Ghoul, so let's pivot and let's talk about Max and Lucy. I have never felt more validated with a prediction, with talking about a show, than I did in this episode. Honestly, I was really worried about last week's review because I came out swinging in defense of Vault 4 about how I didn't think they were that creepy. I didn't think that they were going to end up being the bad guys. I even defended the guy with the specimen control unit because I didn't think that he thought he was attacking Lucy. And thank goodness, I would have been so embarrassed if I had gone on that whole tirade and then it was like, nope, they're just evil. But the resolution here was absolutely wonderful. And we got so many answers and started unraveling so much of the Vault Tech mystery, and it felt really satisfying. Birdie and Overseer Benjamin have Lucy locked up, and they show her the holotape from the origins of Vault 4. Now remember from last episode in Coop's ad for Vault Tech, we know that Vault 4 was a society run by scientists. And in the holotape, we see that that hasn't gone so well. They tried to hybridize humans with radioactive species, and the experiments revolted. Now, something I think that's really interesting here is that that's not technically Vault Tech's fault. Like, Vault Tech's intended experiment was a society run by scientists, not necessarily unethical human experiments. And even in the holotape, the lead scientist is saying, like, don't let this stop the other experiments. Like, we take responsibility. Like, don't let this sour the potential of other societies led by scientists. It seems implied that, like, this was a one-off, it went very badly. It doesn't necessarily condemn Vault Tech and their experiments overall, which I thought was really interesting because Lucy, it still isn't grasping what Vault Tech has done or what the other experiments are. The Overseer asks her, like, what was the experiment in 33? And she's like, there is no experiment. I don't think she's really understanding the question or the scope of things. I love how they set us up in last episode to have these questions. Like, why are these people with genetic differences in this vault? Why does the Overseer have a single eye? Why does that doctor have a nose on his forehead? And I feel like they answered it all so beautifully here. The original Vault Dwellers used people as lab rats, and then the lab rats rebelled. And the Overseer even said in last episode, like, I've been here for 5 generations of Vault Dweller. Like, yeah, those genetic differences from the original experimentation of radioactive DNA or whatever it was have lasted in the vault for generation and generation, and that's really cool. Just really overall, this was like a very satisfying reveal. As they pull Lucy away for her punishment, though, she says, I'm a good person. And that's such a fascinating defense for me because, first of all, she's not really in this case. Like, I know her intent was pure. She thought that people were being tortured or whatever, and she was trying to save them. But all she really did was break into somewhere she wasn't allowed, and she chose violence first. She attacked somebody by throwing acid in his face when he hadn't really done anything. Like I said in my last episode review, I think he picked up the specimen unit because he thought a specimen had gotten loose and was going to threaten the vault. I don't think he was trying to attack Lucy. She attacked first. Her defense of I'm a good person, it's not I'm innocent, because she's not. It's not my intent was good. It's just I'm a good person. Lucy has said the words good person so many times throughout the show. And what I'm noticing is that when she says good person, she means person with worth. When she says I'm a good person, she just means I have worth. Like, don't do this to me. Compared to how she has viewed surface dwellers for her entire life as people who are uncivilized, who don't have worth. And she's going to keep doing this. Maximus watches her get dragged out past his window, and that is a man who does not want to give up his popcorn. I I think that's so cute. He's really having a good time, and he's like, oh, all right, one last handful. We get a full trial for Lucy, and I love that the other vault residents are also eating popcorn. It very much makes me think like, yeah, this is just their entertainment. Like that's how their democracy has kind of developed, and I thought that was fun. Birdie goes on and on about their peace and safety, and again, like I kind of trust her at this point. It's a weird vibe, but the whole thing has been a weird vibe, and we've established that this vault functions pretty well. She's sentenced to death by banishment to the surface, which of course, 2 weeks of supplies that somebody else will carry for her. And I'm just kicking my feet giggling. Like, how cute is that? I love this vault. It's so weird and quirky, but kind and intentional. Like, this is the kind of vault that I would love to like live in or design or play around with. Like, this is great. A big difference between this vault, Vault 4, and her original vault, Vault 33, is that Vault 4 is not nearly as naive as 33, and they're not as judgmental about the people on the surface. They're kind of forced to be very open and accepting. And what you see is that that diversity of thought makes communities stronger. They function better together. They have access to the resources on the surface with their like salvage crews, but they also have the safety of the vault. It's a really wonderful, functional, quirky little society with their own culture, and it's neat. Lucy asks if Max can still stay as he is deciding to steal their fusion core so he can save her with the power armor. And I'm sad for him. Like, he really thinks he's doing the right thing. He really thinks that he needs to save her right now, and he doesn't. It's also such a wonderful parallel to the raider attacking the vault that we saw back in episode 1. It's another slow-mo scene. It's another vault scene. When we watched the raider attack in episode 1, I think it was a fair assumption that they were just doing it for fun. They were just doing it because they're bad. And so it's kind of fun to intentionally have this scene so similar to that one to make this parallel of he's not just doing this for fun. He is making a mistake. We know the motivations behind the violence in this case, and it's so different. They leave the vault. They're walking together. Max still has his power armor, which means he still has the fusion core in it. And Lucy says, like, maybe we shouldn't have taken that. Like, we stole. And Max's response is so matter of fact. He's like, but I needed it. Like, this man with his lame is logic. Lucy convinces him to return the fusion core, and they throw it down the intake chute that they originally came in with. And it's the cutest little callback, this little voice that's like, thank you. I thought that was so cute. Lucy feels bad that she cost Max a spot in Vault 4, and she reassures him, you're a good person, Titus. And there it is again, the good person. Like, what does good person mean? And again, to Lucy, I think good person means person with worth. Like, he's not a bad person who doesn't deserve housing. He's a good person who is worth safe housing. And I think what Lucy hasn't really accepted yet is that I think all people are fundamentally good or worthy people. I think just by the virtue of being a human being, you do deserve safety and food and shelter. And Lucy's not quite at that point yet. She's still categorizing people into good people who deserve things and have worth, and bad people who are uncivilized and don't deserve things. Still, every time she says Titus, I cringe because we know Max is still lying to her. She invites him to come live in her vault with her, and I think that kindness pushes him into feeling guilty enough that he has to come clean. He tells her, I'm not Knight Titus. I'm not a good person. And she compares his mistakes to the fact that she threw acid at a man after only being up here in the wasteland for 2 weeks. She says, the wasteland sucks. Babe, that wasn't the wasteland. That was you. Like, I understand that her views have been so challenged in the last 2 weeks. I understand that she was tortured at the hands of the ghouls. She's struggling. She's dealt with radiation sickness. The wasteland did not make her attack that man. And it's intriguing how quickly she was willing to toss that into the pile of, no, I'm a good person. The wasteland makes us do bad things. And on some level, there is some value in that argument. And I've said this before. I think when people don't have access to their base needs, they are forced to make those choices. But she wasn't in that situation. That does make me wonder if she's got more of a reckoning coming with this idea of good person versus bad person and people making bad choices even if they're not forced to. Now that she knows the truth about his identity, she invites him to come live with her again, and this time he does say yes. The last scene we get with Max and Lucy is at the radio station with Thaddeus. So let's go back a bit and talk about where Thaddeus has been. Remember that Thaddeus we last saw with Max when he thought Max was Knight Titus. He figured out it wasn't Knight Titus. They fight. Max in the power armor stepped on his foot, and Thaddeus took the head and has been journeying alone. He comes across a red rocket, which just I love the red rocket. What a fun location and nod to the games. He takes off his boot and his foot is just disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. The gore in this show is awful. It's definitely Fallout. At this point, CX-404 has been following him, and so he puts her in a Nuka-Cola machine because he can't have her messing up the mission. He says, this is bigger than all of us. And I'm led to think that he really believes in this mission of the Brotherhood. He continues on his journey looking for a radio tower because he needs to get in contact with the Brotherhood so he can give them the head. And as he is walking, the music that is playing from the radio is unmistakably Radio Freedom from the Minutemen in Fallout 4, and I am just absolutely tickled pink. I have been asking for 7 episodes now, where are the Minutemen? Where are the Minutemen values? Is there any nods to the Minutemen? And this is it. That is that Radio Freedom fiddle tune. I'm delighted by it. I'm so overjoyed that that's the music they chose to include here. Thaddeus comes across this weird man who appears to be attempting to shoot himself. It's very weird. For context here, I watch TV with captions on. It just makes it a lot easier for me to process things. And so the first thing I notice is that when this man talks, his character name is Snake Oil Salesman, which maybe gave me more information than I was supposed to have, but was very interesting. The snake oil salesman promises Thaddeus that he can heal him. Come inside. Once they're inside, Thaddeus pulls a gun on this guy. And the thing is, I don't believe for a second that he's gonna shoot it. Thaddeus has had multiple opportunities to be cruel. He could have killed Maximus when he discovered that Max was impersonating Titus. He could have killed CX-404 when she was getting in his way, and he didn't. Twice, he walked away from situations. Yeah, he left them trapped, but that was because he couldn't bear to have actual blood on his hands. So when he pulls the gun on the snake oil salesman, I'm confident that it's a bluff. And of course it is. The snake oil salesman gives him this mixture to inhale. My mind is genuinely so blown when it actually starts working. Truly, my first thought was there's no way, there's no way that this actually worked. I started wondering if the device in the head, because he was carrying it close to him, was actually doing something. I was confused. Literally wrote down, did the head do this somehow? But they talk about the location of the radio tower, and Thaddeus says that place is radioactive, and the snake oil salesman says, well, you don't have to worry about that anymore. So my thoughts immediately shift to, oh my God, has this guy made Thaddeus immortal? Because what a twist that would be, that he healed him, but at the cost of his mortality, which, we've seen a ton of stories about how, mortality, deal with the devil, seems like such a good idea to live forever until you actually have to live forever, which did make me consider for a second, and we're going to get the answers to this in a bit, but if there is some sort of immortality potion, is that what Moldaver's on? He comes across the DJ in the radio tower, and it's wonderful. The set design of having a bunch of dead bodies from booby traps and a sign for no requests is hilarious. It's really so funny, so well done, so post-apocalyptic, but with this guy who just loves records and the authenticity of original recordings. That's a delight. This is when Thaddeus reconnects with Max and Lucy. They come across him here. He shoots at them a bunch, but he's a terrible shot, so none of them hit. But then he gets hit by a booby trap. An arrow fires directly through his neck, and nothing happens. He's standing there why aren't I dead? He then pulls it out, and it heals over. So I'm oh my God, immortality potion for sure. And then my bubble is immediately burst because Maximus says, I think you might be a ghoul. Shoot. That is huge news, right? Oh my God. Ghouls heal? Like, we knew from the scene in Philly where the ghoul was shooting everybody that he was not going down. And he made a comment about how that's like, because he's on a bunch of drugs or something. And I was concerned at how indestructible he seemed. I didn't realize until now that ghouls are actually indestructible. They'll heal over. Like, that's crazy. That is not a thing we've seen in games. Like, absolutely not. That's different. That also contradicts pretty much everything I've ever believed about ghouls. Ghouls are like necrotic, right? Like, they're dead flesh. Like, they can't heal themselves. That's why they don't have noses, or like Hancock in Fallout 4 makes jokes about like, oh, he lost his toe, because their body parts just kind of fall off of them. Like, the idea of the ghoul is that they got so much radiation, but instead of dying, their cells went into this sort of radiostasis, but they're not regenerating new cells. That's kind of like key to the whole idea of ghouls being dead. Like, what? I'm confused. I'm upset. There is so much about ghouls in this show that is so different than anything we've come across in the games. I am honestly really excited to finish this show and then go watch everybody else's takes on this, because I've been avoiding Googling it because I've been avoiding spoilers. I really want to watch the show like not knowing what's going to happen. But this... I don't know, like, that's crazy. Back to Maximus, Thaddeus, and Lucy. The Brotherhood start showing up, which is obviously a problem for Thaddeus because the Brotherhood kills ghouls. Like, that is a fact in games and both in this new lore. But Thaddeus now has to get out of there. Adorably, Lucy is kind of confused. She's like, but this is good, right? Like, they're the good guys? And they tell her it's a complicated organization. This is finally Maximus's chance to really shine. He tells Thaddeus to run, that he's going to be the one to meet them there. And he tells Lucy to take the actual head and go save her dad. Like, he's going to take a decoy head and he's going to take the brunt of what's about to happen with the Brotherhood, which is so brave of him. And then he and Lucy share their first kiss, which I am delighted that that happened after he confessed his true identity to her. I would have been bummed if they had had this really romantic kiss when she still thought that he was Knight Titus, because that's not true. Now she knows him for who he is and respects that he's genuinely being very brave right now. She tells him that she'll wait for him and to find her in her vault, which... ooh, chills. That's all we get for Max and Lucy in this episode, but speaking of the vault, let's go back and let's talk about all the vault scenes now. This whole time, the Raiders have still been being kept prisoner in Vault 33, and remember, Norm's job now is to deliver food to them. We get a montage of him delivering food until this last time where he comes to deliver them food and finds them all dead. Somebody has poisoned all of the Raiders. We know that Norm was kind of thinking about doing this, but he seems kind of surprised by it, so I'm not sure who did. Betty, though, uses that moment as the new overseer to send out assignments to people if they're staying in 33 or if they're going to 32 for the repopulation, which makes me think that maybe she was connected to the deaths of the Raiders and she's using this like as a distraction opportunity. Norm goes to talk to Steph and Chet. Steph has basically moved into Chet's place now. They're living together. They're getting a new home in Vault 33 too. It's very funny to me. Chet is actually looking forward to this moving in with her and getting a new home. He's looking for that fresh start, even though he knows that something weird is going on. And Norm tells him, "You're a coward." Chet responds, "We all are, Norm. That's why we live in a vault." I have so many thoughts on that. I don't know how to categorize that. Like, I guess it's true, but I also don't think that choosing to stay in a place that you have comforts like working toilets is necessarily being a coward. Norm has definitely struggled with the idea of being a coward more than most because of how he hid during the raid. And this definitely drives him towards trying to do a brave thing here. We see the gathering of vault dwellers who's supposed to move into 32, and Betty tells them that they have been chosen for their agreeability and stick-to-itiveness, which maybe is just the way she's complimenting them. But I think it's interesting that the traits they were chosen on are being agreeable and being determined, because maybe that plays into whatever experiment is happening there. Something that stuck out to me is that there were really only a few dozen people there. And I understand, like, this is kind of suspension of disbelief, but I feel like vaults, to be able to sustain human populations for, hundreds of years, you need a lot more people than that to allow, not inbreeding, right? Like, you would need like a couple hundred at least. Like, the amount of people moving into the other vault should be at least a couple hundred. And I understand that's a lot harder to like film as a show, and like this is cuter and it's different. I get it. But it's hard for me to suspend disbelief at that part, that like they're going to repopulate Vault 32 with maybe 30 people. Honestly, I could do a whole separate video essay series about how I would design and lead a vault if I had to, but that's for another time. Stephanie is named the interim overseer of 32, which we knew was going to happen because every overseer is always from Vault 31. We still don't have a reason for that. Norm decides to hack into the overseer's terminal for more information, and the hacking system is gorgeous. It's exactly like it is in the games. It just feels so clunky and beautiful and such a wonderful homage to hacking terminals, and I loved it so much. Once he hacks into the terminal, though, he tries to send a message to 31, which he does by searching send a message to 31, which I kind of hated. I know that's such a minuscule point, but like UI design is so much of what I do that I was like, that's not how that would work. But he does manage to send this message. He pretends that he's Betty and he says, I need to go back to 31. And 31 says, are you compromised? Which confirms for us that some secret is going on in 31. To be honest, I didn't think that that was going to be the case. Like I said, human beings are not great at keeping secrets, especially from family and loved ones, and when it's a shared secret, and over the course of very many years. Like, Stephanie has been one of Lucy's closest friends in the vault for years. What secret childhood could she have that she truly has never slipped up about? Norm sets off for Vault 31 and he's walking there. And I'm sorry, this is suspension of disbelief, but I'm like, how close are these vaults? Like, they should be miles apart for this to make any sense. Like, this should be like a full track that he was at the entrance to 32 that morning and now he's all the way at 31, like within the same day. That's just, these vaults should have thousands of people in them. And I know that they didn't, because Vault Tech didn't actually mean for it to save any significant portion of the population, but they just should. The door to 31 opens for Norm and he goes inside, but there's no person there who opened the door. In fact, there's no people at all. And as he's wandering around, like, he's not seeing any signs of life. He does hear some motion happening. And again, I watched with captions on. The captions described it as mechanical whirring. And then it cuts to black. I don't know what's in 31. I think my best guess is that it's robots. I don't know. Synths? I got nothing. That's all the information we get. And that leaves me with so many questions and only one episode left. So I'm feeling pretty low confidence that we're going to get all these answers in one more episode. I don't know how to feel about this episode. I have so many more questions than I thought I would. Only one episode left in the entire season. I'm wondering how different my experience watching the show is because I've been portioning it out only one episode a week versus somebody who binged it all in one sitting. Because from my point of view, we haven't talked about the head in like weeks. Like, what's going on with that? So I wonder if this was meant to be watched faster. I tried to make a list of everything I did learn in this episode because I felt really weird about the fact that we didn't have more answers. So we did learn a lot about Vault 4. That wrapped up really, really nicely. But then again, Vault 4 has only been a mystery for like the last episode and a quarter. We learned nothing in this episode about Rose or Hank McClane. We learned nothing in this episode about the Enclave or the head or the implant in the head. We learned very little about Moldaver. She was a mention in the very beginning. We found out that she's like holed up in an observatory, and then that she was a cold fusion researcher, but not much more than that. Here are the questions that I still have. How did Moldaver get to the future? What's in the head? What's the deal with Lucy's mom? What's the deal with Lucy's dad? Where is Lucy's dad? Why did they take Lucy's dad? What is the experiment in 31, 32, 33? How do ghouls work? Why are ghouls different than they are in the games? How did Coop eventually learn about Voltac? What is the Enclave? Why did that guy run away from the Enclave? Who killed the Raiders in 33? What's going on in 31? What happened in the past of 32? Are Max and Lucy going to reunite? That is so many questions for only having one episode left. And I really honestly feel like they have dropped the plot line of a lot of these things. Like truly, the Enclave, we haven't talked about the Enclave at all since like episode 1. And again, I wonder, like, was this show meant to be binged? Or are they just trying to leave some big overall open questions to set them up well for season 2? Like, I don't expect that all of these are going to get answered, but I hope that most of them are going to get answered. Also, wasn't there something about the water chip failing in 33? Are we going to come back to that, or was that just a throwaway line? I think at this point, I'm mostly feeling frustrated, but I think I'm okay with that. To be honest, my love of Fallout has never been because of the main quests, but always because of the world and how much fun it is to be there. So I'll still like the show even if the main quest does not resolve in a satisfying way. The biggest gap I see, though, is that the show keeps tiptoeing around this question. It keeps posing this idea of everybody wants to save the world, they just disagree on how, but it doesn't actually dare to ask the question, how would you save the world? Like, we know that Moldaver is going about it one way, but we don't know what that way is. We know that the Brotherhood is going about it in a different way, but we haven't explored that either. The wonderful thing to me about Fallout 4 is that you could choose how you wanted to try and save the world, and you could explore the cause and effect of each of those choices and how they would impact the wasteland. And we really haven't seen that here. They keep circling that question of how to save the world without actually exploring anything that anybody's trying. I think that just about wraps up this review. I'm really excited for episode 8. I think it could go in a million different ways, but I'm intrigued. I'm hoping we get at least some answers that'll kind of wrap this up nicely for me. But it does sound like, from spoiler-free reviews that I've seen, that people are really looking forward to season 2 too. So I'm anticipating some cliffhangers as well. If you've watched this episode, please let me know what you thought of it in the comments. I love talking to you guys about this. I have a playlist of all of my reviews of the show and another playlist of just building in Fallout 4. So if you liked this, check that out. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I'll be back with the last episode of the season next week. Bye-bye.